The barrel was smaller than I expected, matte black against the pale light of our mother's kitchen. Papers sat on the island beneath it, edges squared yellow tabs like little flags of surrender. The refrigerator hummed. The old wall clock clicked in stubborn seconds. My sister's hands trembled, but her eyes didn't. Our father was in his chair by the doorway, tie-loose gaze unfocused, as if sound were moving around him instead of into him. Signed Vanessa said the word, soft as dust. I could smell her perfume over the scent of lemon oil on the oak cabinets. Somewhere down the hall, the porch light clicked on, though it was still daylight. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever been forced to swallow something that wasn't right because family said so, hit that like button and share this with someone who'll understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what came after that kitchen moment. But to understand how we ended up with a gun beside our mother's mixing bowls, you have to know what was stolen long before any money changed hands. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Boston, on a street where mailboxes leaned and porches held their breath through winter. Dad built our house himself, a sturdy colonial with a wraparound porch and a front door that always stuck a bit in July. Mom brewed coffee the old way, slow and patient, steam fogging the window by the sink. She believed in handwritten lists, warm casseroles, and looking people in the eye. I learned bookkeeping on the back of grocery receipts at that kitchen table, a pencil tucked behind my ear, a little accountant in training. Steady work, steady hands, that was my rhythm. I took pride in clean ledgers and bills paid on time. Life doesn't always give you control, she used to say, but you can choose your corner of it. Vanessa chose a different corner. She was the sparkler in full daylight, loud, bright, demanding every eye. When we were girls, I saved my allowance in a glass jar. She borrowed hers against next month. It made for a certain choreography in our house, Mom softening corners, Dad pretending not to see the dents. After Mom's funeral 3 years ago, that choreography fell apart. Her chair sat empty. The porch went quiet. Casseroles cooled untouched. Dad aged a decade in a season. He would retell a story with the end first, or set a coffee mug down and lose it on the very table under his hands. At first, we called it grief. Then the gaps widened like cracks in winter ice. Vanessa arrived in fresh lipstick and late apologies, her heels clicking through the front hall like a performance. She started calling him Daddy again, that sweetened word she saved for moments when she wanted something. Daddy, let me organize your calendar. Daddy, I'll drive you. She carried grocery bags to the counter with a flourish and left with his bank cards tucked between her phone and a smile. If I raised a question, she patted my shoulder the way you soothe a cranky child. Relax, Muriel. He's not a porcelain figurine. The first wrong thing was small. A pill organizer on the counter, the days misaligned the memory meds 2 compartments light. I knew the prescription schedule. I'd written it out in bold marker and taped it inside the cabinet door. When I asked Dad about it, he shrugged, eyes gone watery. Vanessa set it up, honey. She said we needed to adjust. Adjust. A tidy word for an untidy fear. I counted the bottles. The numbers didn't add up. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, the kind with thin walls and a radiator that sighs, hearing Mom's voice say, "Careful now." Then came the bank statements, thick envelopes with the same polite font balances dropping like old shingles in a storm. Investment opportunities, Dad said one Sunday, carving roast beef with hands that used to steady scaffolding in January wind. Vanessa says the returns are promising. A bruise of worry spread across my ribs. I called Dr. Peterson, our family physician, since I scraped my knee on the back steps. He hadn't seen Dad in months. "Bring him in," he said, voice tight. "If you can get him without extra company." But the extra company was always there. Vanessa learned his rhythms the way a hunter learns a deer path. She showed up with appointments no one else could verify and left with files she said she'd tidy up. She straightened photographs and put Dad's wedding ring in a little bowl for safekeeping, then moved the bowl to a place he couldn't find, and told him he was forgetful when he panicked. She began talking over me at dinner, her hand on his sleeve, her voice syrup calm. "It's about priorities, isn't it, Daddy? Muriel means well, but she's buried in spreadsheets." The night the wind rattled the porch swing, I arrived early and caught her in Dad's study. The door half closed, her voice low and urgent into the phone. "It's taking longer. He has clear days. I said I'll handle it." The sentence hung then snapped when she saw me. "Doctor's office?" She chirped, bright as tin. "Incompetent staff." She brushed past me, smelling like gardenias and strategy. I stood in the hallway with my coat half off, hearing the radiator hiss and my heart thump in my throat. When I first brought up guardianship to Dad gently, the way you touch a bruise, he flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I'm not an invalid." He scraped back his chair, eyes filling like a lost boy's. "Your mother would hate this fighting." In the doorway, Vanessa softened her mouth into pity. "See what you're doing, Muriel? Stress isn't good for vascular patients. Dr. Wilson said, calm helps cognition." I looked up Dr. Wilson that night and found more smoke than fire, a suspended license in one state, then another, an office address that moved like a shell game. I printed what I could and slid it into a folder. Paper against paper, evidence against charm. There were numbers I could hold, and numbers I couldn't. $300,000 moved in transfers that looped back to accounts that weren't Dad's. 2 voicemail messages from creditors using Derek's name in tones that lost their patience halfway through. 1 blistering argument recorded on the home security system Mom had installed after a neighbor's break-in the camera in the living room, catching Vanessa hissing, "Sign it! Dad, stop being dramatic!" then smiling when the doorbell rang. I watched the clip on my laptop at midnight with my apartment window cracked to the October air. Down the street, a dog barked. Somewhere in the building, a couple laughed, then didn't. I kept my face still, because if I cried, I'd stop thinking. Richard Harrington's office still smelled like paper and coffee and the wool of old suits. He folded his hands and looked at me the way decent men do when they have to say something worse before they say something better. "Your father asked for a new will," he told me plainly. I refused. He wasn't alone when he asked, and he wasn't himself. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "They brought in another attorney. The paperwork exists." He slid a sheet toward me, his notes not the will, and tapped 2 words. "Undue influence." The phrase sat between us like a cold cup of tea. By then, even the house seemed to know. The porch boards creaked in new places. The grandfather clock missed a chime here and there. Dad wandered through the rooms, touching door frames with the backs of his fingers as if they might read his temperature and give him back what was slipping away. On his lucid afternoons, he told me where he'd stashed receipts for your mother, though she'd been gone for years. I would sit with him on the couch and watch sunlight land in the dust and think about hands his that had built so much. Mine that could only hold on. When the note appeared under my windshield wiper block letters that didn't look like my sister's, my first feeling was not fear. It was recognition. Accidents happen to nosy people. The letters were angry, but the spacing was patient, as if whoever wrote it stood at a kitchen counter like mine, while the coffee brewed printing the threat with careful little pauses. I drove to the station and filed the report. The desk sergeant nodded like men nod when they've seen 100 families make a mess of love. He used soothing language. He promised to document. He did not promise to protect. I walked out into hard afternoon sun, feeling the weight shift onto my own shoulders, with a clarity that tasted like metal. I hired Margaret because she looked at Dad, not over him. She kept records in a spiral notebook with green lines and a coffee ring on the cover. The first afternoon she worked, she put a bowl of apple slices on the table and coaxed Dad to walk the length of the hallway and back. Twice before supper, she said as if this were all ordinary. When Vanessa arrived and found Margaret in the kitchen, the room went colder. "We don't need strangers in our home," she said, voice slippery as spilled oil. I held up Dad's signed consent. "We do." Vanessa smiled with just her mouth. "Final warning," she whispered the way a parent warns a child. The next day at noon, traffic, a dull growl on the main road. I let myself into the house with a bag of groceries and the ordinary fatigue of someone keeping two lives upright. The television wasn't on. The clock ticked too loud. On the kitchen counter was a red-labeled folder, revised estate planning in capitals that didn't bother with subtlety. I stood with my fingers on the cardstock and thought of Mom's handwriting, curvy, a little playful flourishes that made lists look like love letters. Then I opened the folder. The papers had that heavy feel expensive firms, like creamy self-important. A new will leaving almost everything to Vanessa, and a polite $20,000 to me, as if courtesy could scrub theft clean. A power of attorney naming my sister for health and finances. A property transfer prepared for Dad's signature, moving the house I grew up in into Vanessa's name before he was even gone. A medical assessment from Dr. Wilson, stamped with a seal that looked official until you squinted and saw the numbers didn't match any state database I could find. I took photos the way you take pictures of a car accident, fast hands shaking, knowing you'll need proof after the shock fades. Then I put everything back exactly as it had been. Edges aligned, tabs straight. I heard tires on gravel before I heard the engine familiar tread, Vanessa's SUV complaining at the turn. Through the bay window, I saw her step out in a dark pantsuit, hair-smoothed face already arranged. Derek followed, straightening his cuff phone in his palm like a prop. Their shapes came up the walk as if the house had called them home. I tucked my phone into my back pocket and felt it like a small beating heart. Dad appeared in the doorway to the hall, holding onto the frame. "Muriel," he said, blinking like the light had changed too fast. I crossed to him, easing his hand down to mine. "I'm here." He glanced toward the counter, toward the folder, toward the front door. He could no longer quite command. Somewhere behind me, the porch light clicked again, senseless in afternoon. The hallway smelled faintly of sawdust, as if what he'd built were still trying to repair itself. The handle turned. Vanessa's voice floated ahead of her, bright and brittle. "Family meeting," she announced like a hostess placing napkins. Derek set a thick stack of papers on the coffee table with yellow tabs peeking out like stiff little tongues. "Let's keep this civilized," he said. Civilization is a beautiful word when it means decency. It sounds different coming from a man measuring signatures instead of souls. I looked at my father's face, the way clarity passed over it like a cloud shadow. I looked at my sister's composed and glittering a mask she'd long ago mistaken for skin. In the quiet before anyone reached for a pen, I caught my reflection in the glass of the bay window. I didn't look like a warrior. I looked like a woman who balanced ledgers and checked locks twice and knew how to keep her voice level when the room heated up. It would have to be enough. "Dad," I said softly, "do you know what these papers say?" His gaze flickered. Somewhere inside him, a door opened and closed. The clock ticked. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past and faded. Vanessa lifted the top page and slid a pen forward with two fingers like a dealer across green felt. "Let's not drag this out," she said. I set a coffee mug on the table to steady my hand. The porcelain tapped the wood one small, ordinary sound in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I saw in the span of a breath how quickly love can be weaponized when a person believes it owes them a living. And I understood clearly the way you understand a road sign at the last second that if I didn't choose my next step with care, I'd be the one shoved out into the dark. I reached for the folder again, not to sign, but to lay it flat between us. The injustice wasn't just in the words on those pages. It was in the way she'd set the table and assumed I would eat. I looked at my sister. She smiled like the horizon. And somewhere behind that smile, I felt the room tilt towards something I couldn't yet name. Only sense. The way you sense weather changing before the first drop hits the glass. Vanessa's pen hovered just above the paper, the tip shaking in the still air. I could hear the soft wheeze of our father's breath behind me, that shallow rhythm that always came when he was overwhelmed. The house felt like it was listening every tick of the clock, every faint creak in the hallway carrying the weight of what wasn't being said. I stayed very still, watching my sister's eyes. They were glossy and determined, but something in them, something small, was unraveling. "I'll need time to review these," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was calm, too steady, like the voice I used with anxious clients at work. Dad shouldn't sign anything until his physician verifies his condition. Vanessa exhaled through her nose a soft laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. "You think you're the only one who cares about him? You think you're the savior of this family?" I didn't answer. I just picked up the papers and stacked them neatly, aligning the edges until they formed a perfect square. Then I turned to my father. "Why don't we take a break, Dad? I'll make you some tea." He blinked slowly like he was waking from a long dream. "Tea sounds nice," he said. Vanessa's expression flickered, then hardened. She said nothing while I guided him to the kitchen table and filled the kettle. When I turned back, the folder was gone. That night, I drove home through thin fog headlights, cutting long beams through the dark. The road between our houses had become too familiar, its turns memorized by muscle rather than sight. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. I sat in the car with the engine running, letting the hum steady me. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed a sound I'd always found comforting, though that night it only made the city feel larger and emptier. In the morning, I found a voicemail from Vanessa. Her tone was syrup-smooth rehearsed. "Hey, Muriel. Sorry about last night. I think we both got a little emotional. Let's keep things calm for Dad's sake, okay?" She ended with a soft laugh, like she was closing a curtain over the chaos she'd caused. I deleted the message but saved the recording on my computer first. Every small thing mattered now. At work, numbers blurred on my screen. I kept seeing that folder, the bold red label, the trembling pen. Around noon, I emailed Teresa, my old law school friend, who now specialized in elder care cases. She called me back within an hour, her voice firm and direct. "Muriel, this isn't just a family disagreement. You need documentation, dates, witnesses, medical records, and you need to act before your sister drains everything." The words landed like stones. I wrote them down anyway, each one sharp and precise. That night, I began keeping a notebook. I listed transactions, conversations, every odd change in Dad's behavior. The accountant in me cataloged every fact. The daughter in me tried not to cry between lines. The next Sunday, I arrived early for dinner. Vanessa's car was already there, parked at an angle across the driveway. Through the front window, I could see her leaning over Dad's chair, talking low and fast. When she noticed me, she smiled too quickly. "You're early," she said. "I was just helping Daddy with some bills." "Then you won't mind if I take a look?" I replied, my voice mild. Her jaw tightened. "You don't trust me. I don't trust how confused he's become," I said, brushing past her into the living room. Dad's checkbook sat open on the coffee table. Several checks were missing the register, half filled in her handwriting. She reached for the book, but I closed it first and handed it to Dad. "Maybe you should keep this in your desk." He looked from me to her, uncertain which version of his daughters to believe. "I think I'll rest now," he murmured. Then he rose and shuffled toward the hallway, leaving us in the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Vanessa turned on me the moment he was gone. You're poisoning him against me. I'm trying to protect him, I said. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. You have no idea how much debt Derek and I are carrying. None. We're drowning. That money should help both of us. That money is his, I said softly. Not yours, not mine. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. Instead, she brushed imaginary dust off her sleeve. You'll regret making me your enemy. I waited until she left before walking through each room photographing what I could. The empty pill compartments, the unsigned legal drafts I found near the printer, even the half-finished glass of wine on the counter. Evidence was invisible until it wasn't. That night, I called Dr. Peterson. He needs another cognitive evaluation, I told him. Soon. And not when my sister's around. He sighed through the phone. I can come by Tuesday afternoon quietly. Bring your father here if you can. On Tuesday morning, I arrived while Vanessa was out. Dad was dressed neatly, his favorite blue shirt buttoned unevenly. He smiled when he saw me. Going somewhere to see Dr. Peterson? I said. Just a checkup. He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if Vanessa might appear. She said. His voice trailed off. Never mind. All right. At the clinic, Dr. Peterson greeted him warmly, guiding him through simple memory tests and spatial exercises. I sat in the corner, hands clasped, watching as the man who once built an empire of houses struggled to recall the year. When it ended, the doctor met my eyes over the file. He's in moderate decline, he said gently. He shouldn't be making major legal or financial decisions, not without oversight. Driving home, Dad dozed in the passenger seat, head tilted against the window. The sunlight caught the silver in his hair. I wanted to remember him like that peaceful, still somehow himself. That evening, I called Teresa again. She listened quietly, then said, We can petition for temporary guardianship, Muriel. It's a heavy process, but it'll freeze the accounts until a judge reviews his capacity. Do you have proof of your sister's actions? Some, I said. Enough to start. Then start now, she replied. The longer you wait, the more damage she can do. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of caution and calculation. I gathered bank statements from the mail pile Vanessa had left unopened, cross-referencing them with transfers I'd already tracked. I copied the forged medical evaluation from Dr. Wilson's letterhead and sent it to Teresa for verification. Each document felt like a confession in paper form. At night, I barely slept. One evening, after leaving the house, I noticed a car idling at the end of the street. The headlights flicked off when I turned my key. I told myself it was nothing yet. My heart didn't believe it. When I checked again, the car was gone. 2 days later, a note appeared under my windshield wiper. Accidents happen to nosy people. The handwriting was blocky, unfamiliar, deliberate. My first thought was Derek. My second was that Vanessa had crossed a line she could never uncross. I took the note to the local police precinct, where a young officer listened politely, but without conviction. Family tension can get messy, he said, filing the paper into a drawer. We'll keep it on record. The phrase on record sounded like a promise and a dismissal at once. When I left the station, the sky had turned the color of wet cement. I sat in my car, watching rain beat on the windshield, realizing the line between family and enemy had already vanished. The next day, I installed new cameras at Dad's house, small enough to blend into the corners of the living room and kitchen. I explained it to him as a safety measure, and he agreed without question. Your mother always liked feeling secure, he said, patting my hand. That night, while transferring the first footage to my laptop, I caught something that stopped my breath. Vanessa stood over him at the dining table, voice sharp and fast, the kind of tone you use when you've stopped pretending. "Just sign it," she hissed. "Stop acting helpless." When the doorbell rang, she smiled, kissed his forehead, and answered with a cheerful, "Oh, hi." The mask slid back into place so quickly it almost looked choreographed. I watched it twice, then a third time. My hands shook, but my resolve didn't. I burned the timestamp into memory. A week later, I met Teresa at her downtown office. The windows looked out over the riverlight glinting off the current. She spread the documents across her desk, photos, recording statements like evidence in a trial. "This is solid," she said. "We can file for emergency guardianship by Friday. It'll trigger an investigation into both the medical and financial misconduct." I nodded. "Do it." "Muriel," she said softly, her eyes kind. "You need to be careful. People who feel cornered do reckless things." "I know," I answered. "That's why I'm documenting everything." By the time I reached Dad's house that evening, the sun was setting behind the trees, throwing long bars of orange across the porch. Margaret met me at the door, concern etched into her face. "Vanessa came by earlier," she said quietly. "Told me I was no longer needed. She had papers with your father's signature." I didn't want to argue. My stomach dropped. "Where are they now?" "Inside," Margaret whispered. "She and her husband. They've been waiting." For a long moment, I just stood on the porch, my fingers gripping the rail. Through the front window, I could see the faint glow of the living room lamp shadows moving behind it. The air smelled of cut grass and coming rain. Every instinct in me screamed to leave to call for help, but I couldn't. My father was in there. So I took one breath, then another, and turned the handle. The door opened on silence. Too much silence. Even the old clock in the hallway had stopped. I could see Dad sitting in his armchair, his posture, small hands, clasped like he was waiting for a verdict. Vanessa stood near the dining table, a stack of papers beside her. Derek leaned against the wall, arms folded, his smile tight. "Good you're here," Vanessa said, voice bright. "Let's finish this before dinner." My pulse thudded in my ears, but I stepped forward anyway. "Finish what the transfer," she said. "Everything's ready. All that's left is your signature." The air felt heavy, pressing against my lungs. I glanced at my father, then back at her. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I already have," she said softly. "You just haven't realized it yet." I reached for the papers, but she caught my wrist, her grip stronger than I expected. "Sign them, Muriel," she whispered, eyes glittering. "It's time you accepted your place." I pulled free and looked at her, really looked. The sister I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Her smile was too still, her eyes too hollow. In that moment, I knew the next step wouldn't be legal or logical. It would be survival. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the hill, a low warning carried on humid air. I didn't move. Neither did she. Between us lay a table, a stack of papers, and years of love turned to poison. And in the hush, before the first drop of rain hit the roof, I realized something terrible. This wouldn't end with words. Vanessa's hand tightened around my wrist before I could pull away. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't even flicker, only held mine with a strange kind of calm. "You think you can ruin me?" she whispered, her breath shaking. "But you won't. I'm done letting you control everything." I didn't move, not even when I felt her nails dig into my skin. My voice came out low, steady. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to save what's left of this family. The thunder outside rolled again, closer this time. A flash of light broke through the windows, and for a second, her face looked almost fragile, like she could still remember who she'd been before all this. But then, Derek spoke from the doorway. "Enough," he said. "Just sign Muriel. Let's end this tonight." I stepped back, shaking free of Vanessa's grip. My hand throbbed the skin red where her nails had pressed. I could see the papers on the table, the pen waiting the space where my name would go. But I had already decided. I wasn't signing a thing. "I'm not going to fight with you," I said. "But I am going to protect Dad." Something in my voice must have reached her because she didn't answer right away. Her expression shifted again, rage trying to hold its place against something more desperate. Then she laughed, a sound so sharp it hurt my ears. "You don't get it, do you? He's not yours to protect. He's mine." Dad flinched at the sound, his hand twitching against the armrest. I took a slow step toward him, lowering my tone. "Dad, why don't we go sit outside?" "It's too warm in here." He blinked, lost between us, but before he could stand, Derek moved to block the way. "We're not going anywhere until she cooperates." It was then that I saw the tremor in my father's hands. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I turned back to Vanessa, quieter now. "You've gone too far. You know that, right?" Her eyes flicked toward Derek as if searching for direction. He didn't speak. I picked up my bag, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You'll hear from my attorney. You should both leave before this gets worse." She said nothing as I walked to the door, but when I opened it, the night air rushed in, heavy with rain and earth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't look back. Outside, the storm had broken. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, and only when the door shut behind me did I let myself shake. The house glowed faintly behind the wet glass, the porch light flickering like it was trying to warn me. I drove straight to Richard Harrington's office, even though it was nearly 9. His secretary, Helen, let me in with a worried look. He was still working under the yellow glow of his desk lamp, sleeves rolled, tie undone. When he saw my face, he pushed the paperwork aside without a word. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. Every word of it. The confrontation, the forged signatures, the threats. When I was finished, he leaned back, rubbing his temple. "You were right to walk away," he said finally. "But you need more than that now." He opened a drawer and handed me a small black recorder. "Put this somewhere safe in your father's study. If she speaks freely, we'll have what we need to stop this before anyone gets hurt." I stared at the recorder in my palm, small and harmless looking. "You really think she'll incriminate herself?" Richard's eyes were tired. "I've seen greed strip away every mask people wear. She'll say something when she thinks she's alone." The rain had slowed by the time I reached home. I sat in the dark for a long time, the recorder on the seat beside me, its red light blinking softly. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's radio murmured through the walls. I thought of Mom, how she used to say that storms clean the air. But all I could feel was the weight of what was coming. The next morning, I returned to the house under a sky washed pale by rain. Vanessa's car wasn't there. Dad answered the door himself, hair uncombed, slippers on the wrong feet. He looked like a man half asleep inside his own life. "Morning, sweetheart," he said. "Did I know you were coming?" "Just wanted to check on you," I said gently. "Maybe make breakfast." While he settled at the kitchen table, I slipped into his study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I found a place for the recorder on the bookshelf behind the family photo albums, close enough to catch voices, hidden enough to go unnoticed. When I turned back, I saw something that stopped me. On the desk in Vanessa's handwriting was a note: meeting with Dr. Wilson at 3 p.m. Bring Dad's ID. I felt my stomach tighten. The name was a warning all by itself. I took a photo of the note and left everything else untouched. For the rest of the morning, I hovered between the kitchen and the living room, pretending to read while Dad dozed in his chair. The house felt too still, like the air was holding its breath. At 2:30, I heard a car in the driveway. Vanessa came in without knocking, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor. She kissed Dad's cheek, all sugar and smiles. "Ready for our appointment, Daddy?" He blinked up at her, confused. "Appointment?" "Yes, remember, with Dr. Wilson?" I stepped forward. "He won't be going anywhere with that man." Vanessa turned her face, perfectly composed. "Muriel, don't start. He's his own person. He's a vulnerable patient," I said. "And Dr. Wilson isn't licensed to practice." Her mouth curved in a small, tight smile. "You've been busy." "Busy keeping him safe." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took his arm, coaxing him up from the chair. "We're leaving." "Don't wait up." I reached for the phone, but before I could dial, they were gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood in the doorway, watching their car disappear down the street, my heart hammering in my chest. That night, I listened to the recording. Hours of quiet, then faint voices, Vanessa and Derek arguing about the money, about me. Then Vanessa's voice, sharper, colder. "Once the transfers are complete, she can make all the noise she wants. Everything will be legal." I sat at the kitchen table, my hands pressed to my mouth. The sound of her voice saying those words was worse than I expected. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I already knew. The next morning, I took the recorder to Richard's office. He listened without speaking, his eyes darkening with every sentence. When it ended, he clicked the recorder off and exhaled. "This is more than manipulation," he said. "It's calculated fraud." He picked up his phone and called Teresa, the attorney handling the guardianship filing. Within minutes, the two of them were coordinating next steps: medical verification, police consultation, emergency petitions. I sat in silence, staring at the rain streaking the office window. When they hung up, Richard turned to me. "I want you to stay somewhere safe for a few days. Don't meet them alone again." "I can't leave Dad," I said. "Then make sure you're never alone in that house, and keep that phone on you at all times." That evening, I called Margaret, the home aide, and asked her to return. She arrived the next morning, a small bag over her shoulder. Her eyes cautious, but kind. "If you think it's necessary, I'll stay as long as you need," she said. I felt something loosen in my chest. It's necessary. For a few days, things stayed quiet. Vanessa didn't call, didn't visit. Dad seemed calmer, enjoying Margaret's company and the small routines she brought back into the house. Fresh coffee, soft music, a steady voice reading the newspaper aloud. For a while, it almost felt normal. Then one Friday afternoon, the balance shattered. Margaret called me at work, her voice tight. "She's here," she said. "She told me I was fired. She has papers." I was out the door before she finished the sentence. The drive felt endless, each red light a threat. When I pulled into the driveway, Vanessa's SUV was parked crooked again, Derek's truck beside it. Margaret met me on the porch, wringing her hands. "I tried to call you, but there's no signal inside." "Go home," I told her. "I'll handle it." She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "Be careful." Inside the house was dim. The curtains were half drawn, the air heavy with something sour and metallic. I could hear voices from the kitchen, Vanessa's smooth and deliberate, Derek's lower, impatient. Dad sat in his chair again, his posture small, eyes unfocused. Vanessa stood near the counter, a stack of documents beside her. Derek leaned close, whispering something I couldn't catch. When they noticed me, Vanessa smiled. Perfect timing. We were just getting ready to finalize things. I didn't answer. My gaze slid to the papers, then to my father. What have you told him? The truth, she said. That you're trying to steal what's his. I felt the room tilt slightly, like air pressure had shifted. He's not the one making these decisions anymore, Vanessa. You are. Derek stepped closer, his jaw tightening. You don't belong here. I met his eyes. Neither do you. Vanessa's hand moved toward her bag, slow, deliberate. The motion was small, but it sent a chill through me. I knew that gesture now. I'd seen it once before. Outside, a single drop of rain hit the window pane, followed by another. The sky was darkening fast, thunder rolling low and steady beyond the trees. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket, a text from Teresa confirming that the guardianship hearing had been approved for the following week. Relief mixed with dread. If I could survive the next few days, it would all be over. But when I looked up again, Vanessa's hand was already inside her bag. Her voice came out calm, almost kind. No more games, Muriel. I took one step back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The last light of day flickered across the countertop, catching the reflection of metal. That was the moment everything changed. The light caught the edge of the gun before I truly saw it, that flat glint against the kitchen tile. The sound of rain softened everything, even the fear. My sister's hand trembled as she aimed, but her voice was steady in that practiced way of hers. Sign the papers, she said, or this ends now. Dad sat frozen in his chair near the doorway, his eyes wide but unfocused. His mind drifting in and out like a weak signal. I could smell coffee grounds in the air and the faint tang of metal from the gun. It felt unreal, like I had slipped into someone else's life. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out slowly. You don't have to do this. Vanessa's fingers tightened. You've taken everything from me already. This is just balance. Behind her, Derek moved closer, setting the papers on the counter beside her. Sign them, Muriel. Walk away. Everyone gets what they want. I took a breath, small and deliberate, trying to keep my voice calm. And if I don't use your imagination? She said, her tone smooth as glass. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hear between heartbeats. I felt my phone in my pocket, the faint hum of its warmth against my leg. When I'd arrived that morning, I had started the emergency call protocol Teresa and I had set up. It was still connected, still recording. I hadn't planned for this, not exactly, but I had prepared for something close. I lifted my eyes to hers. You're shaking, I said. Her chin lifted defiant. No, I'm not. You are. My voice softened. You don't want this any more than I do. She blinked, the barrel wavering just slightly. You think you can talk your way out of everything. I don't need to talk, I said. I just need you to look. I pulled the phone slowly from my pocket, turning the screen toward her. It glowed faintly in the dim light, an open call to 911, 12 minutes and counting. They've heard every word I said. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. Then Derek cursed under his breath and lunged toward me. I stepped back, my hand closing around the edge of the counter. The gun slipped from Vanessa's grip, clattering against the tile. The noise jolted Dad upright, a burst of clarity in his eyes. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking but strong. Then with surprising force, he swept a lamp from the side table. It hit the floor, the bulb exploding in a bright flash. At that same instant, the front door burst open. 2 police officers stormed in, rainwater pooling behind them, their commands echoing off the walls. Everything happened fast after that. Vanessa's stunned expression, Derek's hands in the air, the officers shouting the metallic clink of handcuffs. I stood in the middle of it, too still to move. When one of the officers reached for me asking if I was hurt, I realized my whole body was shaking. My father sat back down heavily, his breathing rough but even. He looked at me, then at Vanessa, as she was led away. I remember, he said softly. I remember what she wanted me to sign. His voice broke on the last word. Outside, the storm had eased into drizzle. Red and blue lights reflected off wet pavement, painting the house in pulsing color. I stood on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders while an officer took my statement. My words felt far away, like I was describing someone else's story. When they finally drove Vanessa and Derek away, the quiet that followed was heavy and strange. Dad's hand found mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen it." I squeezed his hand gently. "You couldn't have. She fooled everyone." He shook his head, his eyes glassy. "Not you." In the days that followed, the house filled with the dull sounds of aftermath, detectives coming and going, evidence bags rustling, the low murmur of voices through closed doors. I spent hours at the police station retelling each detail, replaying the recordings showing the bank documents, the forged medical files, the note left on my car. Every retelling peeled back another layer of disbelief until what had happened no longer felt surreal. It just felt heavy. The officers told me the gun was unregistered, the serial number filed off. Derek's fingerprints were on several of the forged documents. Vanessa's signature appeared across every transfer form. The case they built was airtight. When I went home that night, the house smelled like rain and lemon oil. The kitchen floor still bore a faint mark where the gun had fallen. Dad had been moved to the hospital for evaluation, and the quiet felt wrong without the sound of his chair creaking or his soft humming during breakfast. I made coffee just to have something to hold. The first sip burned my tongue, but I didn't mind. It made me feel awake again. That week blurred into paperwork, court hearings, and long hours beside Dad's hospital bed. He drifted between clarity and confusion, sometimes calling me Eleanor, sometimes remembering every detail of the house we grew up in. On one of his good days, he reached for my hand and said, "You saved me." I didn't answer. I just nodded and held on. When the trial began, I sat in the front row with Richard beside me. Vanessa entered the courtroom in a pale orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled. She didn't look at me, only at the floor. Derek's attorney struck a deal offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint her as a desperate woman driven by financial pressure, but the evidence was too clear, too deliberate. The recording sealed it, the sound of her voice threatening to solve me permanently. The proof of medication tampering the financial trail that led straight to her and Derek. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Vanessa didn't react. She just stood there motionless until the bailiff led her away. After the hearing, I found Dad waiting in the hallway, his hands folded around his cane. His eyes were wet, though he tried to hide it. "She's still my daughter," he said. "I know," I told him, "and I'm still your other one." He smiled faintly, a tired smile that reached just far enough to touch his eyes. Life after the trial didn't return to normal. It reshaped itself around absence. The absence of my sister's voice, of constant tension, of the weight I'd been carrying for months. Dad's condition stabilized but never improved. We hired a live-in nurse and I moved into the guest room to help with his care. Some evenings he would ask where Vanessa was and I'd pause, gauging his clarity. Sometimes I told him the truth. Sometimes I let silence answer for me. One afternoon he asked if he could see her. I hesitated, but agreed. The prison allowed a supervised visit due to his health. When we walked in, the air smelled faintly of bleach and cold metal. Vanessa looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pulled back, her face pale. Dad took her hand across the table, his voice trembling. "You're still my girl," he said. "But what you did nearly destroyed us." She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I know, Daddy." He turned to me, his eyes soft. "She's lost Muriel. But maybe not forever." When we left, he leaned on my arm, walking slow. "It hurt to see her like that," he said quietly. "I know, but I needed to." He passed away 6 months later in his sleep. "Peaceful," the doctor said. I sat with him until morning, watching the light change on the walls, listening to the house breathe. The funeral was small old friends, a few distant cousins, Margaret, Richard, Teresa. Vanessa was allowed to attend under guard, standing apart from the rest. Her face was unreadable, but when our eyes met, she gave a small nod. I nodded back. Later, as I helped the caretaker fold the chairs, I found a single white rose left on the pew where she'd stood. No note, just the flower quiet and deliberate. That evening I packed away Dad's clothes, the smell of cedar and aftershave still clinging to the fabric. The house felt different, emptier, but also lighter, as if it could finally exhale. I spent that night on the porch where Mom used to sit, watching the sky fade from gold to blue. The air was cool, the kind of air that carries both sorrow and relief. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, to letting fear turn into silence. And I realized something my mother had always known, that survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about choosing peace after the storm has passed. The sound of crickets filled the yard, steady and low. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. I stayed there until the stars came out, tracing patterns through the dark. The fight was over, but the healing had just begun. And as I sat there listening to the night settle around me, I could feel the first hint of peace rising quietly in my chest. Fragile but real, like the world at last was beginning to breathe again. The air smelled of rain and lilac that morning, the kind of scent that carries both memory and promise. I stood on the porch of the family home with my hands resting on the railing, the wood cool under my palms. The garden had begun to bloom again. Tulips and daffodils, the same ones I'd planted with Dad last spring, swayed gently in the breeze. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy, it just felt quiet. The house behind me no longer seemed haunted by what happened. It was simply a house again, walls and rooms that had seen both kindness and cruelty and somehow survived them. The past didn't echo so loudly now. It whispered. I still woke some mornings expecting to hear Dad moving around the kitchen, the rattle of a spoon in his coffee cup. Sometimes I even caught myself calling out to him before realizing the house would not answer back. But the grief had softened at the edges. It no longer tore, it rested. After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to sell the property right away. I stayed for months, moving between caretaking and quiet repair. Margaret came by every few days, and sometimes we sat on the porch together at dusk, watching the sky change colors. She would hum softly old hymns, mostly her voice low and steady. There was comfort in that sound, uncomplicated, human. Vanessa wrote her first letter from prison 2 months after the sentencing. It was short, handwritten, the pen pressing deep into the paper as if she needed the words to stay put. "I don't expect you to respond," she wrote. "I just want to say I'm sorry. I've had time to think. Too much time." I didn't write back right away. I carried that letter folded in my wallet for weeks, taking it out at odd moments on a park bench in grocery lines before bed. The apology didn't undo anything, but it felt like the first breath of honesty I'd heard from her in years. Eventually, I sent a note in return. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something quieter. I hope you keep doing the work you started in that letter I wrote. Dad would have wanted that. A few months later, another envelope came. Her handwriting was steadier this time. She told me she was attending counseling groups working in the library and learning to read medical records for older inmates who needed help understanding their care. It's small work, she said, but it feels right. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful reunion, just the slow rebuilding of decency through ink and distance. That was enough for now. By early spring, I decided it was time to let the house go. The realtor placed a sign by the mailbox. The wood freshly painted the letters crisp against the green. I thought it would hurt to see it, but it didn't. It looked like progress. Before the closing date, I walked through every room one last time. The living room still smelled faintly of furniture polish and old books. The study held the last traces of Dad's cologne and the dust of his papers. I paused at the piano Mom used to play, running my hand along the keys. A few of them stuck just like they always had. The sound that came out was soft and uneven, but it filled the air, like a memory learning to breathe again. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the new work, the Walter Brewster Foundation for Elder Care and Advocacy. Teresa and I set up the office in a small building near the river, the kind with sun-faded brick and a bell that chimed softly when you opened the door. We started with simple goals: legal education for families, financial guidance, dementia support. But word spread faster than we expected. Soon, we had a volunteer network, retired nurses, social workers, and family caregivers sharing their stories and their time. Dr. Peterson joined as our medical advisor, helping build a workshop series about safe medication practices and recognizing early signs of cognitive decline. Margaret volunteered twice a week, organizing the front desk and offering quiet reassurance to families who walked in looking exhausted. Sometimes, when the office emptied for the day, I stayed behind with the lights low, looking over the mission statement printed on the wall. Protect dignity, preserve independence, restore trust. 3 simple sentences born from a house that nearly broke under the weight of betrayal. Richard came by on a windy afternoon not long after we opened. He looked older, the kind of older that comes from closing too many painful cases. He smiled when he saw the framed photo of Dad on my desk. "You did right by him, Muriel," he said. "And by yourself. I just wanted something good to come out of all this," I told him. He nodded. "It already has." That evening, after he left, I stood by the window, watching the light fade across the river. The water caught the sunset in shades of gold and rose. I thought about the journey from that kitchen floor to this small office, from fear to calm. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, like light through closed blinds, warming everything it touched in time. The following week, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections, an update about Vanessa's progress. She'd completed her first year without incident and was now mentoring new inmates through a literacy program. They said she had requested that half her small earnings be sent to the foundation each month. I stared at that line for a long while, unsure if it was guilt or gratitude that tightened my throat. Maybe both. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. I simply folded it and placed it in a box with Dad's old watch and a few family photographs. Some things I've learned belong to private memory. As summer settled in, I found my rhythm again: morning walks, quiet breakfasts, evenings spent on the apartment balcony surrounded by potted herbs and the hum of cicadas. The world had slowed to a pace I could finally keep. One Saturday, I visited the cemetery with fresh flowers. The grass was bright, and the air had that warm, still quality that comes before evening rain. I knelt between my parents' headstones, brushing away a few leaves. "I'm all right now," I said softly. "The house is gone, but what you built isn't." A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lilac from somewhere beyond the fence. It reminded me of Mom's perfume of Sunday afternoons and sunlight across the kitchen floor. I stayed until the shadows grew long, tracing the carved letters of their names before standing to leave. There was peace in that small ritual, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just settles quietly in your chest and stays. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote one final letter to Vanessa. I told her about the garden blooming again, about Dad's foundation, about how the house had finally sold to a young couple expecting their first child. I ended it with a single line. Maybe someday when we're both ready, we can sit on that porch again and remember who we were before everything broke. I didn't know if she would ever read it, but it felt right to write it. Now, whenever I walk into the foundation office, I pause at the entryway. A photograph hangs there. The old porch at dusk, the light soft across the wood, the tulips just beginning to open. Beneath it, in small letters, reads a quote from Dad I found in one of his notebooks. "You build things to last, not to forget." That's what I want the world to remember about him. Not the illness, not the manipulation, but the quiet decency that built more than walls. It built values worth carrying forward. Outside, the sky darkens and the streetlights blink on one by one. Through the window, I can see the river catching the last of the light, the surface rippling gold before slipping into night. Peace doesn't come because the past is over. It comes because we choose to stop living there. I've learned that letting go isn't losing. Sometimes it's the only way to keep what matters. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you've ever found your own way back from betrayal, share it. Someone out there needs to hear that peace is still possible. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Take care of yourself and hold on to the quiet when you find it. Sometimes that's where the healing begins.